There is a gate at St. James's Palace that most people never notice. It stands at the far end of a quiet courtyard, framed by old stone walls and watched over by a guardsman who has stood in that exact spot, in one form or another, for more than 2 decades. The gate is not grand. It does not have gilded bars or a royal crest above it. It is simply a door between the public world and the private one. And on a cold Tuesday afternoon in the autumn of 2024, that door became the center of one of the most quietly remarkable moments in recent royal history. His name was James Alderton. He was 51 years old, with gray beginning to settle at his temples and the kind of posture that only comes from years of military service. He had joined the household cavalry as a young man of 29, long before most people his age had figured out what they wanted from life. He had served through 4 prime ministers, 2 royal funerals, 1 coronation, and more state visits than he could count. He had stood at his post in freezing January rain and in the baking heat of July ceremonials. He had never once asked for recognition, and recognition had never particularly found him. That suited James Alderton perfectly well. The palace had its rhythms, and Alderton knew them the way a sailor knows the sea. He knew which mornings were busy and which were quiet. He knew the sound of different footsteps on the stone corridor behind him. He knew the weight of a day when something important was about to happen, and the lighter feeling of a day when nothing much would. On this particular Tuesday, the morning had been unremarkable. A junior aide had passed through with a stack of folders. A florist had made a delivery. A senior official had left in a dark car at 11:30 and had not yet returned. Then, at 2 in the afternoon, a different kind of visitor arrived. He came on foot, wearing a dark overcoat and a relaxed expression. He was well dressed without being formal, the way a person looks when they have spent their whole life in rooms where other people dress formally and have long since stopped feeling the need to match them. He carried no bag. He offered no identification. He simply walked up to the checkpoint with the ease of a man who has never in his life been made to wait, and he smiled. Tom Parker Bowles was 50 years old. He was the son of Queen Consort Camilla from her first marriage, which meant that he occupied a curious and particular position in the orbit of the British royal family. He was not a working royal. He had no official title, no ceremonial duties, no place in the order of succession. He was, by profession and by passion, a food writer, a celebrated one, with several books to his name and a reputation for wit and warmth that had made him a beloved figure in London's cultural world. He was charming. He was well-read. He was, by all accounts, genuinely good company. He was also, on this particular afternoon, a man who had arrived at a checkpoint without prior clearance. "I'm here to see my mother," he said, pleasantly. "She'll be expecting me." Alderton looked at him. His face did not change. His posture did not change. The only thing that moved was his eyes, which took in the visitor with the quiet thoroughness of a man who had spent 22 years learning to read people in the first 3 seconds of an encounter. "Sir," he said, "I'll need to verify clearance before I can allow access." That process applies to all visitors. Parker Bowles smiled, as though the answer were a small and charming misunderstanding that would clear itself up in a moment. "Of course," he said. "But I'm sure this can be sorted quickly. My mother is just inside." "I understand, sir. I'll need to make the call." What followed were 20 minutes that felt, to those watching from a careful distance, like something being held very still above a hard floor. Alderton made his call. The relevant aide was not immediately available. A second call was made. There was a brief administrative delay of the kind that palace life generates effortlessly and resolves slowly. Parker Bowles waited. He was polite about it. He did not tap his foot or check his watch with exaggerated impatience. He had the self-possession of someone who has been around enough powerful people to know that performing irritation is generally less effective than simply applying quiet, consistent pressure. And so he applied quiet, consistent pressure. "You do know who I am," he said, after a few minutes. Not as a threat. More as a gentle reminder, the way one might remind a shopkeeper that they had met before. "I do, sir. My mother is the Queen Consort. I imagine the king himself would find this situation rather unnecessary, if he knew about it." There was a pause. Alderton seemed to consider the statement with genuine seriousness, the way a chess player considers a move that looks bold but does not actually threaten the king. "If His Majesty instructs me otherwise, I will act accordingly, Alderton said. Until that instruction comes, I am bound by the clearance procedure. That procedure is not personal, sir. It applies to every visitor without exception. Parker Bowles tried a different approach. He mentioned the name of a senior equerry who was known to be friendly to the family. He referenced a visit he had made to the palace only 3 weeks earlier, which had gone entirely without complication. He pointed out, gently, that his mother was almost certainly within calling distance and that a simple phone call to her directly would resolve the matter in under a minute. I appreciate that, sir, Alderton said. The call is being processed through the correct channel. I'd ask for your patience a little longer. There was a footman at the far end of the corridor who had discovered something of great interest in the middle distance. There was a junior aide near the doorway to the left who had become very absorbed in a folder she was holding. 2 other palace staff, passing through on unrelated business, slowed their pace just slightly as they went by, as people do when they sense that something worth remembering is happening. Parker Bowles looked at Alderton for a moment. Not with hostility. With something closer to genuine curiosity, as though he were encountering a variety of person he had not expected to find standing between him and his mother on a Tuesday afternoon. You're really not going to let me through, he said. Still pleasant. Slightly disbelieving. Not until clearance is confirmed, sir. No. There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. It does not stride into a room with its chin raised or deliver speeches about principle. It simply stands where it is supposed to stand and does what it is supposed to do, regardless of how inconvenient that becomes for anyone in the vicinity. Most people spend their whole lives hoping they have this kind of courage without ever finding out whether they actually do. James Alderton had found out long ago. He had joined the household cavalry because he believed in something. He had stayed for 22 years because that belief had never once wavered. It was not a complicated belief. It was simply this, that the rules existed for a reason, that institutions were only as strong as the people willing to uphold them, and that the moment you began making exceptions based on who a person was related to rather than what they were entitled to, you had started down a road with no good end. He had seen men bend those rules over the years. Some of them had done it out of genuine kindness. Some had done it out of nervousness, not wanting to cause a scene. Some had done it because the person they were bending the rules for was powerful enough that refusing felt like a career risk. Alderton had watched all of it with the quiet attentiveness of a man who has decided a long time ago how he is going to behave when his own moment comes. His moment had come on a gray Tuesday with a well-dressed food writer standing in front of him. And James Alderton stood exactly where he had always planned to stand. The call came through at 14 minutes past the half hour. A senior aide, slightly breathless, confirmed that Mr. Parker Bowles was expected and that the visit had been anticipated but not formally logged in the day's security schedule. A miscommunication, it appeared, somewhere between the private secretary's office and the gate registry. These things happened, occasionally, in a palace that ran on human beings rather than machines. Alderton received the confirmation. He turned back to his visitor. Sir, your clearance has been confirmed. Please go through. Parker Bowles nodded. He said thank you. He meant it, which was noticeable. He walked through the gate, paused after a step or two, and glanced back at Alderton in the way a person glances back when they are not quite finished thinking about something. You're good at your job, he said. It was a simple sentence, offered without irony. Alderton gave a short nod. Thank you, sir. And that was all. Parker Bowles walked on. The gate closed behind him. The corridor returned to its usual quiet. The footman at the far end went back to his duties. The junior aide moved on with her folder. The 2 staff members who had slowed their pace continued on their way. But the palace has a memory of its own. Not an official one. Not one written in any record or mentioned in any briefing. It is the memory that lives in the glances exchanged between people who were there, in the small comments made over cups of tea inside offices, in the way a story passes from one person to another with a certain warmth of tone that signals this one is worth keeping. By the following morning, most of the senior household staff had heard some version of what had happened at the East Wing checkpoint. The details varied slightly, as they always do when a story travels by word of mouth. But the core of it remained the same in every version. A warrant officer had held the line, politely and firmly, against a visitor who had every social reason to expect an exception, and he had done it without drama, without embarrassment, and without flinching. The reaction, among those who heard the story, was interesting. There were some who raised their eyebrows, wondering quietly whether the delay had really been necessary. These were mostly the newer members of staff, less steeped in the culture of protocol. There were others who nodded slowly and said nothing, which in palace language meant something closer to approval than neutrality. And there were a few, the older hands, the ones who had been around long enough to know what the institution actually rested on, who smiled in a particular way that had nothing to do with amusement and everything to do with recognition. They had seen this kind of thing before. Or rather, they had hoped they would see it, and now they had. King Charles III had spoken, in various forms throughout his public life, about the importance of institutions. About the need for a monarchy that meant something beyond ceremony and tradition. About the idea that true service was not about comfort or convenience, but about upholding something larger than oneself, even when that was difficult, even when it was unpopular, even when the person asking you to make an exception was connected to the very family you had sworn to serve. He had put these ideas into speeches and interviews and the careful language of formal occasions. He had made them part of the philosophy of his reign. James Alderton had made them real on a Tuesday afternoon at a checkpoint that most people walk past without a second glance. That is the thing about loyalty that is often misunderstood. People imagine it as something warm and immediate, a feeling, an allegiance, a willingness to follow someone anywhere. And sometimes it is those things. But the deeper form of loyalty, the kind that actually holds an institution together when the pressures against it are at their most subtle and most persistent, looks much less dramatic. It looks like a man at a gatehouse making a phone call, waiting for it to be answered, and refusing to move until it is. It looks, very often, like someone doing exactly what they said they would do. Tom Parker Bowles was not, in this story, a villain. It would be both inaccurate and unkind to paint him that way. He was a man who had grown up in a world where doors opened because of who he was, and who had, by most accounts, navigated that world with considerably more grace and self-awareness than many in his position would have managed. He had built a genuine career on his own talent and his own work. He was loved by the people who knew him. The frustration he felt that afternoon at the checkpoint was entirely human, the kind of frustration that most of us feel when a bureaucratic process slows us down on the way to something we care about. His remark at the end, "You're good at your job," said something important about him. A smaller person would have walked through that gate in silence, nursing a grievance. He chose to acknowledge what he had seen instead. That, too, is a form of integrity. And Alderton, for his part, had never been unkind. He had never been dismissive or cold. He had treated his visitor with the same level of courteous, unhurried professionalism that he gave to everyone who came to that checkpoint. That was, in a quiet way, the deepest form of respect available to him in that situation, to treat a powerful person exactly as he would treat anyone else. Autumn turned to winter that year. The palace moved on through its schedule of events and appearances and carefully managed public moments. James Alderton continued to stand at his post, as he had for 22 years, as unremarkable from the outside as the gate he guarded. No official commendation was given. No press release was issued. No one in any position of authority made a speech about what had happened. The palace does not work that way. Acknowledgement, when it comes at all, comes quietly and privately, in the form of a nod from a senior colleague, or a word from someone whose word carries weight, or simply the knowledge, the private, unshakable knowledge, that you did what you were supposed to do when it actually mattered. Alderton carried that knowledge the way he carried everything, steadily, without fuss, and without any apparent need for the world to notice. There is a particular kind of person that every institution depends on but rarely celebrates. They are not the ones who make the decisions or give the orders. They are not the ones whose names appear on official documents or whose photographs appear in the press. They are the ones who show up, every day, and hold the thing together by simply refusing to let it fall apart. They are the ones who understand that a rule is not a technicality, it is a promise. A promise that the system will work the same way for everyone, regardless of how important or well-connected they might be. James Alderton was that kind of person. He had been that kind of person every day for 22 years. And on a gray Tuesday afternoon in the autumn of 2024, standing at a quiet gate between one world and another, he proved it in the most ordinary and most extraordinary way possible. He simply did his job. And in doing so, he kept a promise that mattered far more than anyone standing at that gate that day, or reading about it afterward, could fully measure. A promise to the institution he served, to the king whose legacy he carried without ever having been asked to, and to the idea, old and stubborn and still worth fighting for, that in this country, the rules hold. Even when it is uncomfortable. Even when it is inconvenient. Even when the person on the other side of the gate is the son of the queen.